Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be looking at making a blaster type of mage. And I want to give the credit for this video to one of my subscribers by the name of Rob Vera. He has left numerous comments in numerous videos talking about direct damage builds and how he feels I've been definitely underrating the value of direct damage spells. And I think he has a very solid point, because one thing that I've always been looking at is spells like, say, Finger of Death or Disintegrate at higher levels, which allow a saving throw. And if your target has legendary resistances or even magic resistance, suddenly it's a very high level spell slot that isn't really doing a lot of damage. And the other big alternative, of course, are area of effect spells, which are really great under the right circumstances. If you need to clear out a bunch of minions, Fireball, is perfect. You got a bunch of guys in a hallway, Lightning Bolt can just clear it out. But those spells don't scale particularly well with upcasting because they're damaging a large number of targets, right? So the damage, you gain 2 more Sorcerer levels, for example, and your spell slot increases by 1. That Fireball now does 1 extra dice 6 of damage if they miss their saving throw. It's only doing half that if they make it. And so, while there's, still some scaling there, I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying that often I see games where people cast Fireball with, say, a 5th or 6th level spell slot. Most of the targets make their saving throw, and by now, just the fact that we're casting spells with 6th level spell slots tells you we're not fighting things with 30 hit points anymore. We're fighting things with 230 hit points, or at least 150 kind of area. And so, doing an extra 6 or 8 damage on a Fireball when the monsters have 5 times as many hit points as they had when we first got Fireball isn't particularly good. Our spells just aren't scaling very well. But he's pointed out some spells that do scale very well. And when I was thinking about this the other day at work, because, again, never thinking about work as much as possible, I started comparing it to, say, like a Ranger, right? How come I never make the argument that Ranger damage doesn't scale with monster hit points? Because, you could say, well, that Ranger gets his extra attack at level 5, and that's it. For the rest of his career, he's going to have 2 attacks around. He's doing that longbow twice per turn, and that's it. He's getting his D8 plus his Dex mod. How come nobody complains that that doesn't scale? Well, it's because we know that that's not really an honest argument. Because that Ranger could be adding other bonuses to that damage. What if he gets a magic bow, or magic arrows, or both, and now he's able to add the magic damages in there? What if he uses spells like Hunter's Mark? It's on his spell list, he's a Ranger. Every attack that hits now is doing that extra 1d6 damage. And already we're starting to see how these little bonuses can start to add up. We haven't even looked at subclasses yet. Every Ranger subclass has some way of adding damage to the class. But hey, let's just go with the most popular and look at Gloomstalker. That Gloomstalker doesn't have 2 attacks in the opening round. He gets an extra 1. Meaning that, sure, he has 2 attacks normally, but in the opening round of combat, he has 3. And that extra attack also does an extra d8 damage. So suddenly, he's able to use that extra attack with extra damage, but it also combines with his improved dexterity modifiers. It's combining with those magic arrows and the magic bow and everything else he's got. What if he takes a feat, like, say, Sharpshooter? Obvious choice. Every attack that hits is doing that plus 10 damage, including that extra attack he got in the first round of combat. And they're all stacking with all these bonuses. So why not do that with a Sorcerer, or even with a Wizard, for example? Now, we're going to be looking at Sorcerer in this video because we're finishing off Sorcerers as I've been moving through all the classes. But Evoker Wizards can do much of the same things that we're going to talk about in this video. Don't think that it's only limited to Sorcerer. But why not? Why not build a Sorcerer who can find ways of getting these damage bonuses and then use spells that make multiple hits against one target, like an Archer would do? We're basically going to make a spell-casting Archer. And the truth is, it can be horrifically effective. Like, some pretty staggering numbers. Because one inherent advantage that the spellcasters have over that Ranger is that you can upcast something like a Scorching Ray and get way more rays. The Ranger can't really just add more attacks to himself. Sure, he could multiclass in a fighter and grab Action Surge, but so could the Sorcerer. And that's one thing we're going to be looking at. So this is going to be the basic idea. We're going to have a Sorcerer, and that's going to be the majority of our levels. That's going to be our main class. But we're going to be looking to grab a couple levels in other classes so that we can find ways to add modifiers to that damage, preferably ones that apply to every single hit. And then we're basically going to be a spellcasting ranger. Except, unlike the ranger, we're not stopped from taking spells like counterspell. We could still take all the great, we can have absorb elements and shield. All the great spells you might have taken on a sorcerer to begin with, you could still take. We're really just looking to add a couple damaging spells to our repertoire and really try to get the most out of those. And then when combat starts, we're going to use our spells to try to burn down high value targets as quickly as possible, preferably in the first round of combat. And that's going to be the video. So, even though, oops, I just bumped the camera. That's not great, probably, but show must go on. So even though Sorcerer is going to be the main class, it's going to be the one we look at last, just because it's going to be the most involved. So let's start with Fighter. Fighter is going to be very simple. We're taking 2 levels of Fighter purely for Action Surge. Now, Fighter does give us some interesting options. We could start Fighter and get some better armor and shield. I'm probably not going to do that, but I'm just saying it is an option. Another thing we would have gotten from Fighter usually would have been proficiency on Constitution saving throws, and that's our concentration saving throws. But Sorcerer also gives us Constitution saving throws, so no real benefit there. The reason I don't really care about having better armor is because the other class we're going to take is actually Hexblade Warlock, and that'll give us much of the same things for free. And I really don't want to delay my spell casting levels that much. I'd like to get some casting in, and then, grab, once I've got either my 2nd level spells or maybe even my 3rd level spells, then I'm going to grab those 2 levels of Fighter, grab Action Surge, just kind of with the icing on the cake. But because it's the easiest one to deal with, we're talking about it first. So what else are we going to get from Fighter, though? It's not just Action Surge. Obviously, we could have some armor. We already mentioned that. We're also going to get a fighting style. I'm probably going to take the defensive fighting style because none of the others really add much to me. I'm not taking enough levels to get extra attack. This is not going to be like a Gish build where we're using Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade a lot. We are just going to be a sniper caster burning guys down with spells. So, defensive is always good. We're going to be wearing armor anyways, So why not add +1 to our armor class? We're probably not going to have heavy armor. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't, again. I'm just saying, to me, it's not really as much of a priority. I'm already needing charisma, and I'm probably going to want at least some dexterity, because I'm probably going to want to have a decent initiative, especially if we go with one of the racial choices I will be recommending. So, heavy armor could be a thing. It doesn't have to be, though, is what I'm saying. Either way, we're also going to get 2nd Wind at 1st level, so we're going to have a bonus action heal. It's not going to scale particularly well because it scales with our fighter levels, but still a D10 plus 2 hit points on a bonus action. If we need it, it's great. If we don't, no problem. It's there in an emergency. Of course, the 2nd level, we're grabbing Action Surge. We're not going past that, so we're not going to have a fighter subclass. Warlock is going to be the other class we're going to be dipping into, and specifically Hexblade. Now, I think you could make an argument to only grab 1 level of Warlock, but since I'm going to be playing a ranged sniper, I figure I might as well go 2 and grab Agonizing Blast as one of my invocations. It's not going to be my primary attack, but it's the best damage cantrip in the game. There might be times when I just want to cast a spell and maybe quicken it, and then follow that up with an Eldritch Blast. And if I can only cast a cantrip after my quicken spell, why not just pick the best damaging cantrip in the game, right? So, we've already got 1 level of Warlock. We're already going to have great charisma. A 2nd level to grab, maybe a Repelling Blast on top of our Agonizing Blast or whatever else isn't a bad option. Especially if we have party members who are going to be trying to, maybe want to push or pull creatures around the battlefield. Repelling Blast is very, very handy. And, you might have those scenarios where you do a lot of dungeons, and maybe you're worried about running out of sorcery points and spell slots, so you kind of need to budget yourself a little bit. Having something like an Eldritch Blast to fall back on, just to do some good, steady, reliable damage, is not the worst thing ever. So, I don't mind 2 levels here. Notice, though, the reason I'm concerned about it, and the reason I want to talk about it, at least a little bit, is because if we have 2 levels of Fighter and 2 levels of Warlock, it means that the most we could possibly have is 16 levels of Sorcerer. And it kind of, it kind of hurts a little bit in my heart to get to level 20 on a caster and not have 9th level spells and be capped out at 8. But the truth is, I would rather be good for like the majority of my career and just, kind of do what I'm going to talk about in this video and be awesome, rather than be worried about like, oh, but I don't want to do this because, if we get to level 20, then the very last session of play that we play, I can have a 9th level spell. I'd rather be good for the majority of my career than be good like right at the very end. I mean, not that you wouldn't have been good anyway, but just saying, I don't mind we may never get to 20 anyways. If we do, the game's probably going to end right away. Like, I've had multiple campaigns that reach 20, but they almost always end at 20, or maybe 1 or 2 game sessions after hitting 20, So it's something that I'm not going to be super concerned about. But I do want to at least mention it in case people are worried, right? The main thing, though, we're grabbing from Hexblade is not actually Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast. It is Hexblade's Curse. And usually, again, if you say you're taking Sorcerer and we're grabbing Hexblade and we're grabbing Fighter, our immediate thought might be this is some sort of Gish build. But again, it's not. Now, we could Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade something, right? There's nothing wrong with having that in our back pocket. We get those enemies that are able to teleport on top of us. We don't want to have to be disengaging all the time. You might be like, you know what? I'm just going to Booming Blade this guy. And then if I do move away, whatever. If he follows me, he's taking extra damage. That's fine. But that's not going to be our primary focus. The main thing, though, Hexblade's Curse is going to allow us to crit on a 19 or 20, which is very good because we're going to be using spells like Scorching Ray that make a lot of attack rolls. So why not crit twice as often, right? The other thing it's going to give us, well, it's going to give 2 other things, but the main one is adding our proficiency bonus to the damage of each of our hits. So every single Scorching Ray that hits is going to add that damage, just like every single bolt from an Eldritch Blast would add that damage. This is already starting to sound pretty good. We're finding ways to add that proficiency bonus onto every hit. We can also take the Hex spell, which does something similar, and I don't think that's a bad plan either. If you want to have something you can kind of concentrate on, and like I said, if you are doing a dungeon, maybe you want to just have Hex running with those Eldritch Blasts, and then we're going to use our Hexblade's Curse plus our big spells on that, the big, bad, evil endgame fight type of thing, right? The other thing it's going to do is regain hit points equal to our Warlock level plus our Charisma modifier, but kind of like what we mentioned with Second Wind, we're not going to have a lot of Warlock levels here either, so it's not a big deal. But, if the creature dies and we're missing some hit points, 3 hit points back, or, on top of all the benefits we actually wanted, isn't a bad thing. So, and Hexblade's also going to give us some armor and shield proficiencies, which is very nice because those, are just going to come with, whenever we decide to multiclass into Hexblade, we can get those. And I'm probably going to start Sorcerer, like I said, but, maybe I decide to go Sorcerer 1, then grab my 2 levels of Hexblade. Maybe I'd go to Sorcerer 3 and then grab a couple levels of Hexblade or whatever. Whenever I want to add it, that or Fighter is going to give us some better armor options. And I don't mind grabbing those early, to be honest. We're kind of squishy in those early levels. Maybe going 1 level Sorcerer, then getting a couple levels of Hexblade under our belt, and then going back to Sorcerer to say 3 or 5, and then grabbing the Fighter levels. Not a bad way to do things. I'm probably prioritizing Fighter last, though, because I really want to get at least 2nd, if not 3rd level spells. And those 2 Fighter levels, are already, the 2 Warlock levels are already delaying that a bit. But now that, if you add the 2 more Fighter levels on that, you're pushing it quite a bit back. Anyways, so that's going to be the basic idea. As for the Sorcerer subclasses, really you can take almost any of them. There are a few specific abilities that I'm going to mention and we'll talk about right now, but I think the subclass for Sorcerer is somewhat open, right? So obviously, the first one that comes to mind is Draconic, though. We get the Elemental Affinity ability at level 6, and that's going to add our Charisma bonus to one of the damage rolls when we're using spell attack. And this isn't bad, but it's not huge either. But, it's definitely still worth mentioning. We're going to have that 1 Elemental Affinity, so let's say we go Fire or whatever. And we use Scorching Ray, an extra 5 damage to the attack. One of the attacks is not the worst thing ever. We can also get Wings at level 14, assuming we get that high ever. We can give ourselves resistance to whatever the element type we chose. It's not a bad choice. I just don't think that it's, stands out so much, though, that I'm really, really concerned about it. If we're using something like Magic Missile, though, according to the way Jerry Crawford describes Magic Missile, you're supposed to just roll the d4 once and then multiply that by however many missiles you had and adding your bonuses, in which case suddenly that starts looking a lot better. So, bear that in mind that if you are using that, that's not the version I've ever seen anybody else use. If you have 4 missiles, everybody just rolls 4 die 4 and then adds 4, but whatever. That's the way he actually described it, though. So, keep that in mind. That's a big bonus to something like Magic Missile if you're going with the Draconic Sorcerer. Oh, actually, you'd have to be able to use the Transmute, though, in order to turn it into the appropriate element. But you could do that. So, there is that. Sorry. Still getting over whatever sickness I had like a week ago. Seems to have rebounded. It's not coronavirus. It's because I keep sleeping with the fan on every night because I'm up on the 3rd floor in my bedroom, and then I wake up at 2 in the morning. My face is freezing and my throat's all rough. But what do you do? Not fall asleep till 2 in the morning? Of course not. Anyways, moving on though. Clockwork Soul actually has a pretty good ability, but we don't get it till 14th level, which is pretty late. And, by then you're probably going to be 18th level overall, right? But it does give us a bonus action where we can go into a trance, and then all of our attack rolls for spells that are a 9 or less are treated as 10s. And if you wanted to, really, cast, say, Scorching Ray using 7th and 8th level spell slots potentially, that's a lot of attack rolls that are all going to be turned into 10s now, and they're probably going to hit your target. So there is that. Unfortunately, it is using your bonus action though, which does mean that you're probably not going to be able to use it with the Hexblade's Curse. But, keep it in mind. Like I said, it's a very high level ability. Probably not worth worrying about too much, but it is there. The other one that I thought I'd at least mention, which I think is probably the worst option of the bunch, but still a good option, is Divine Soul, because it does give us some options to things like Guiding Bolt that we might want to use at really low levels. But we get Scorching Ray so early, I don't know that I'm worried about it. But, it does give us some more flexibility. We can grab some other spells, so we're not just doing damage either. And, like I said, there's nothing stopping a Sorcerer who wants to be a Blaster from also grabbing some of the other great options we have on our spell list. Or, in this case, also in the Cleric spell list. So those are the subclasses that really jump out at me as having abilities that could potentially be adding some more good damaging spells to our repertoire, or finding ways to boost that damage up. But really, I think any Sorcerer will work. Now, usually, let's move on to race. Usually, I don't really talk about race. Ever since we got Tashes, stats are even variable. You can move them around, so it doesn't really matter much. Back in the day, if you're like, oh, you're playing a Ranger, consider Wood Elf, because it has +2 Dex and +1 Wisdom. And it's like, sure, that was a great choice back in the day. But these days, you can pretty much just put the stats anywhere. And the truth is, it's also really hard to compete with Variant Human and Custom Lineage, both of which could just start the game with a feat. However, Monsters of the Multiverse did give us one very interesting option, and that was the Bugbear. The Bugbear has a special ability, there's sneak attack, where, or surprise attack, sorry, if the opponent hasn't acted yet in the combat, so most likely in round 1, if you have a higher initiative roll than they do, then all your attacks do an extra 2d6 damage if they hit. So it's kind of similar to the Assassin Rogue, where if the opponent hasn't added, all your attacks are made with advantage. But in this case, instead of getting advantage, we just do more damage, which in many ways is even better, because what if we could find a way to get advantage anyways? We could have advantage and extra damage per hit, while potentially critting on 19 or 20s thanks to Hexblade's Curse. So, if you think about a Scorching Ray, if you're acting ahead of your opponent in the initiative order, just by being a Bugbear, it's literally doubling the damage. Like Scorching Ray is only 2d6 damage. You're getting an extra 2d6 for every ray that hits by being Bugbear. Suddenly you're looking at like potentially 12d6 damage already just with a second level spell slot. You know, that's getting pretty crazy. So, you know, and then potentially action surging once we have 2 levels of fighter, and upcasting, and adding all the bonuses from our Hexblade's Curse. And already you can see how we're starting to escalate that damage even higher. So, this was an example that Rob Vera gave me in one of the comment section of one of my videos, where he said that you could use your... This was with a level 20 character, right? So we have our 2 levels of fighter, our 2 levels of warlock, and our 16 levels of sorcerer. So this was the example he gave using a Bugbear. You would bonus action with the Hexblade's Curse. You would cast Scorching Ray using an 8th level spell slot. You would then action surge and Scorching Ray again with a 7th level spell slot. And assuming that you're acting ahead of your opponent in the initiative order, so you get the Bugbear racial damages as well, you're looking at 17 rays doing 2d6 plus 6 damage each. 2d6 from each ray plus your Hexblade's Curse to each one because you're level 20, so you have plus 6 proficiency bonus. With another 2d6 per ray for being a Bugbear, which really gives you 17 rays at 4d6 plus 6 damage altogether, which is 68 d6 plus 102. Like 68 d6 damage plus 102. That's in like the mid 300s on average. Like 330-ish damage. I mean, that's pretty insane. So, that was definitely, when I read that, I was like, okay, you've won me over. I have to make a video at some point talking about this type of build. So, thank you for that, Rob. And the best part is that because you're a sorcerer, you can always use your ability to turn your, like, some of those low-level spell slots you don't need anymore into sorcery points and convert those back into spell slots. Give up a bunch of those 2nd and maybe 4th level spells or 5th or whatever it is and regain those 7th and 8th level spell slots after your short rest so that you can do it all over again. And you can literally just do this multiple times a day. That is absolutely insane. While still having things like Counterspell in your back pocket. That if you need it, you've got it, right? So let's talk a little bit about the Metamagics that we might want to use. And we'll talk a little bit about the feats, of course. So, oh, by the way, I'm not saying you have to go Bugbear with this either, right? That's kind of why I mentioned the damage separately. Don't feel that you have to take Bugbear. But keep in mind that it starts looking like a really, really good option when you start looking at how much damage it does. Ugh, absolutely insane. All right, so obviously I'm going to take Quicken regardless. I think Quicken is our best Metamagic. And it looks even better when we have those 2 levels of Warlock because we could potentially cast, we could still be casting like great spells, like crowd control spells or whatever else we wanted to use, right? There's nothing stopping you from throwing down a, do we have Force Cage? Crap, I don't even remember. Whatever. And then following it up with a Quicken casting that and following it up with like an Eldritch Blast or something, right? So Quicken is still a really good choice. Obviously, Empowered starts looking pretty good because we're rolling a lot of damage dice. And for only 1 sorcery point, we can re-roll a number of those dice equal to our charisma bonus. And the best part is, we don't have to use it in advance. We can roll all those dice and then go, I think I'm going to spend a sorcery point and re-roll 5 of those dice. And we can keep the good ones, right? So all those 4s, 5s, and 6s we keep. We just re-roll the 1s and 2s and, it starts becoming very, very good. The other thing is that Empowered is one of the very few Metamagics that we can actually combine it with something else. So even if we wanted to, like, say, Quicken cast something or whatever, we could also empower that spell on top of it, which usually we cannot do. So, pretty good use there. Transmuted spell. if we're relying very heavily on spells like Scorching Ray, and fire is one of the most resisted damage types in the entire game, we might want to be able to turn Scorching Ray into something that's not fire damage. That could be a big thing. So that is one I would definitely consider. And this is one of the reasons why, even though I like Draconic Ancestry as a build potential here, I find that I don't know that I'm really concerned that much about doing an extra 5 damage, because I'm probably going to want to be able to transmute my Scorching Ray into whatever damage type I happen to need. If I don't need to transmute it, even better. But so much stuff is resistant or immune to fire that, if I'm relying very heavily on a fire spell, especially 1 or 2 specific spells, I probably want to be able to change those to a different damage type in an emergency. And another one I might consider is Seeking Spell. Now this one's a little expensive. 2 sorcery points to re-roll the die on the attack roll. And I mean, honestly, to go back to that level 20 example, which is extreme, of course, but, if we're launching 17 rays, we're not going to be able to re-roll all of those, or even a good chunk of them at 2 sorcery points per miss, right? I might want to re-roll a couple of them, but that's going to be expensive. And so I kind of put Seeking a step below the others. I think it's still good, but a little expensive. And so, it's not going to be one of my absolute go-tos. That being said, though, it can also be combined with other Metamagics. So, you could empower a spell and Seeking the same spell, which is pretty nice. Those are the main ones I'm going to look at. After that, things like Subtle Spell are still really great, obviously. There are other options, but those are the main ones that are going to help to boost our damage and make our attacks more reliable, I find. I'm getting less value out of Twin because I'm going to be using spells that make lots of attacks rather than spells that only target one target. That's not to say you couldn't take Twin and still use it for great spells like buffing allies and stuff like that and twinning them. Obviously, anything you normally would have done with the Sorcerer, you can still do on this guy. But we're going to be focusing mostly on just burning somebody down with Scorching Rays. So, spells like that, don't really help us as much there. As for feats, now, if I went Bugbear, which I might have, Alert is going to be one of the most important feats I could take, honestly, because I want to be going earlier than my target in that opening round of combat. And +5 to my initiative is going to be very, very big in that. And, while it's not common, not being surprised is also really nice too, So, Alert is definitely going to be a top tier choice if I went Bugbear especially. It's good even if I didn't know. Other options, of course. Elemental Adept. Being able to ignore resistance on damage type is pretty good, especially if we're going fire, for example. And being able to turn our 1s into 2s isn't the worst thing ever, but unless you rolled a whole bunch of 1s, it usually doesn't change the damage that much. And if you did roll a whole bunch of 1s, you're still not going to be super glad with the end result, so it probably won't matter. But ignoring resistance can be pretty good. However, I kind of feel like Transmuted Spell Metamagic would have gotten me around that problem anyways, at least if I know that it's resistant, at least. And maybe I didn't, right? Maybe I'm fighting something I've never seen before, I don't know that it's resistant to fire, and, now I have a sad day because my damage just got cut in half. At least if I have Elemental Adapt, I don't have to worry about it, right? Metamagic Adapt. I mentioned this before, but honestly, this feat is almost a must-have for every sorcerer. A couple more Metamagics, a couple more sorcery points. It just adds so much to the class. It's so good. So good on a class that already has a bunch of sorcery points. Other options, of course, Lucky. Lucky can kind of help to do much of what a Seeking Spell could have done, right? I got a couple bad attack rolls in there. Just re-roll them and hope we get better. And, of course, forcing the DM to re-roll that nat 20 he got on me is still pretty good, at least until we get our 1 D&D when it looks like nothing can crit with players anymore. But we're going to cover that in an upcoming video once we get through all the class stuff. I still like Lucky. Very good choice. Eldritch Adept. I don't know that I put as much value on this one. It allows me to choose one Warlock invocation. I would probably take this if I didn't grab the second level of Warlock. If I was like, I'm only going to grab Hexblade's Curse and one level of Warlock, then maybe fitting this in for an Agonizing Blast isn't so bad. But honestly, I kind of value feats more highly than I do, that second level of Warlock, right? Almost, right? So I'd probably rather just take the second level of Warlock, get the invocations anyways, and reserve this feat for a charisma increase or for one of the other feats we've already talked about. It seems pretty expensive to me. It's not like Metamagic Adept where we're getting so much for that one feat choice. In this case, we're getting like an invocation, which we could have gotten anyways with one more level of Warlock. In fact, we would have gotten 2 invocations and a second spell slot that we could be converting into sorcery points every time we're about to take a short rest. Oh, I didn't spend my Warlock spell slots? Sorcery points them. We finished our short rest? Got my Warlock slots back. Maybe just convert them again right away. Who knows? Depending on, ability scores and stuff, like let's say we went with, maybe we did go custom lineage instead of Bugbear because we wanted to start with like an 18 charisma, for example. Then the old standbys of like Fey Touched, Shadow Touched, Telekinetic, and Telepathic start looking pretty decent, as well as just other feats that we could be taking in there. Especially Shadow Touched. Being able to, we don't really need the mobility of Misty Step. Usually I like Fey Touch better, right? That's usually because I'm looking at somebody who, wants to build a Misty Step. In this case, though, being able to turn invisible and then Scorching Ray somebody while we're invisible and have advantage on all those attacks starts suddenly looking really, really good. So out of all those ones, I think Shadow Touch would probably be my number 1 pick. Especially since Telekinetic, while a great feat, uses our bonus action a lot. And I'm probably going to be hexing or Hexblade's cursing or even just quicken casting spells. That bonus action could be pretty busy. Whereas, Shadow Touched, being invisible, sniping somebody with advantage, and just doing a truckload of damage to them. Sounds pretty good to me. So those are going to be the feat choices that I'm mostly looking into. So basically, my top picks would be Alert, Metamagic Adept, and then Elemental Adept, and Lucky, kind of that next tier choice, and then the other ones we mentioned, right? And yeah, basically that's everything I have here. So we're basically, just to sum everything up, we're taking that same concept that we see so often applied to martial characters, where we're going to take a bunch of attacks and then find modifiers that can boost the damage of those attacks, and we're just going to apply it to a sorcerer who can not only do that, but could also be upcasting that Scorching Ray and getting a whole bunch of attacks, more, like firing 7 or 8 Scorching Rays and then action surging and doing it again. Like, fighters don't even get that many attacks. Even, I guess at level 20 they could have 4 and then they could action surge and make 4 more, right? And maybe they have a bonus action attack in there too. So, they're getting a lot of attacks. I'm not, saying they aren't. But, you could be making even more. So anyways, that's everything I have for this video. I hope you enjoy it. It is definitely a different look at how to play a caster. And it's one that really excited me when I started writing Rob's comments. So once again, Rob, thank you very much for the idea. I hope I did you proud on this video. I'm sure I probably missed things and you're probably like, why didn't you mention this? And why didn't you mention that? Or in one of your videos, I mentioned this idea and I probably just missed it. And obviously I have some of my own input in here as well. It's not like he wrote out a script for me to read or anything like that. But I just kind of took a bunch of your comments from some of the different videos, plus some of my own ideas, and was just like, man, that actually sounds like a really fun way to play a sorcerer. And yeah, so I'm hoping other people will enjoy it too. That's everything we have though. The next video, we're going to be moving on to our Warlock, and we're going to be doing the Warlock multiclassing tier list, of course, and then I'm sure there's got to be at least 1 or 2 Warlocks I haven't covered yet for subclasses. But as you know, Warlock is my favorite class, and I've covered them a lot, but Sword Coast Adventures Guide got to have something in there for me, When in doubt, find the worst subclass in the game, because I probably haven't covered it since it's terrible. But anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I read every single comment, even if I don't always respond to them, but I promise I read every single one. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.